In this digital age, where a plethora of information can be transmitted at remarkable speeds, one could think that any attempt to hinder the spread of particular information would be futile. However, despite the advancements in information sharing and communication technology, there are methods private individuals, corporations, and governments can utilize to limit the spread of information. Algorithm manipulation, communication blackouts, CGI, deepfakes, AI, blockers, jammers, mass media manipulation, and simple old-school rhetoric, among other avenues. Evidently, the spread of information has become augmented, but so have the methods that can be used to manipulate and censor it. Censorship, or in today's lingo, preventing the spread of misinformation, is frequently proclaimed as necessary in order to keep people safe, protect democracy, and for the public good. Perhaps this would be veritable if, and only if, the people engaging in these acts were trustworthy and they were able to resist humanity's natural proclivities towards corruption and malevolence. In the infamous words of John Dalbrook Acton, quote, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely," end quote. Indeed, power and absolute power especially provides a strong temptation for abuse and weaponization. Contemporary efforts to inhibit the spread of what is classified as misinformation, otherwise known as thinly veiled attempts to masquerade censorship and prevent damning information from coming to light, are following the pattern where significant powers are utilized as yet another form of control and influence. Today's discussion examines the inherent problems of censorship, particularly in relation to freedom of expression, thought, conscience, and religion, but I'm certainly not limiting it to those topics. The fundamental assertion that I'm making is that even if censorship is performed for public safety or in the name of the public good, its inherent tendency towards tyranny seriously undermines its validity as a justifiable endeavor. George R. R. Martin brilliantly wrote in his book, A Clash of Kings, that, quote, "When you tear out a man's tongue, you aren't proving him a liar. You're only telling the world that you fear what he might say," end quote. Indeed, the proclivity of censorship is evidently not to uphold truth and ethics, but rather, it's used as a weapon to silence opposition and protect the reputations of malevolent and pathological liars. To begin, I should define my terms. For censorship, I'll utilize the Cambridge Dictionary's definitions as they align with how I perceive the concept. Censorship is defined as, quote, "the action of preventing part or the whole of a book, film, work of art, document, or other kind of communication from being seen or made available to the public, because it's considered to be offensive or harmful, or because it contains information that someone wishes to keep secret, often for political reasons," end quote. That's one definition, but the second one is also relevant. It states that censorship is, quote, "a system in which an authority limits the ideas that people are allowed to express and prevents books, films, works of art, documents, or other kinds of communications from being seen or made available to the public, because they include or support certain ideas," end quote. As we can see from these definitions, censorship can include attempts to conceal certain documents or prevent information from being spread. However, it can also be a sophisticated system that hinders the free flow of information, thought, and discussion. Or it could be both. The second definition is what I'll primarily focus on, but the first is also highly relevant. Before I elaborate on the inherent problems of censorship, I must acknowledge that certain information, media, and actions should be restricted, condemned, and/or banned outright. The most obvious example that comes to mind is sexually explicit media involving minors, and it's absolutely clear as to why this media is banned. Other examples exist, but you get the picture. My point is that even in free societies, there will be information, ideas, media, and actions that must be restricted, condemned, or outright banned. Of course, determining what fits this interpretation is rather evident on some occasions, but less evident for others. My principal concern revolves around the censoring of information, ideas, thoughts, perspectives, and discussions that are particularly damning to private individuals, corporations, and governments with something to hide, or with a particular special interest they seek to protect. They may masquerade their actions by saying, "It's for the public good," or "for public safety," but the true intentions, hidden beneath the veil, are far more malevolent and catastrophic. This leads me to comment on an inherent problem of censorship, which is the unreliability, untrustworthiness, and corruption of people who wield this power. In a perfect world, censorship for the public good or for public safety might be a positive endeavor. Truth would be upheld, and lies would be condemned or exposed. Attempts to deceive would be revealed, and objectively false information, without subjective interpretation bias, would be eliminated. However, as we realize, we live in an imperfect and fallen world. Human nature isn't perfect. We're fundamentally flawed because of the temptation towards evil that afflicts us all. Even the best of us with the noblest of intentions can fall into the trap of abusing power for personal gain, to save face, to punish our enemies, or just for the thrill of it. A pursuit that can initially begin to uphold truth, integrity, and honor can eventually descend into tyranny, madness, and malevolence because of human nature. George Orwell's 1984, perhaps the greatest work of fiction on censorship, dystopia, and tyrannical regimes, offers a profound understanding into the nature of these phenomena. For today's discussion, I've extracted passages that are the most applicable from my assertions, although several others exist. The first is from page 157, and I'm citing from the Penguin Random House edition, which remarks, quote, "Every record has been destroyed or falsified, every book rewritten, every picture is being repainted, every statue and street building has been renamed, every date has been altered, and the process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right." End quote. As this quote demonstrates, censorship frequently becomes not about preserving objective truth, but it's rather about preventing the truth from being exposed. Censorship is instead a deliberate endeavor designed to preserve a fabricated narrative. Tyrannical regimes in the 20th century, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union most prominently, utilized censorship as a method of population control and programming. Narratives were constructed, and even if they possessed a smidgen of truth, they were framed in a profoundly ideological manner to oversimplify multifaceted issues and protect the evil intentions of their leaders. Indeed, the party is to be framed as always right, no matter how malevolent and erroneous they are in actuality. People who condemned and rebuked their lies often faced retribution, sometimes in the most heinous of ways. Which leads me to the next passage that remarks on page 81, quote, "The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command." End quote. Indeed, even if you comprehend what the truth is and you can see through the lies, deceptions, fabrications, and falsehoods, you're instructed or compelled under intimidation and force to distrust your own senses. Why? Because it's about protecting the narratives and reputations of corrupt leaders and institutions. This is occurring today, evidently in communist China, Russia, Iran, Cuba, and Venezuela, among others. But most concerningly, this act has appeared in Western democratic countries as well. A recently passed piece of legislation in Canada, Bill C-11, colloquially known as the Online Streaming Act, is yet another example of the creeping nature of totalitarian censorship. It drew significant ire and concern among people from various walks of life, artists, YouTubers, politicians, and authors, to name a few. The principal concern pertains to how this bill grants the Canadian government sweeping powers in terms of determining what is considered Canadian content, and how this affects what Canadians see on various forms of media. Algorithm manipulation and the pushing of particular narratives, topics, people, and organizations naturally comes to mind. Having read through the bill myself, I'm certainly appalled at its contents, but I'm also equally appalled at the possible implications that can be extracted from reading between the lines. I thought, like many others, that it's just a thinly veiled attempt at censorship and narrative construction. It's Justin Trudeau's latest effort to stifle free thought, expression, and discussion, especially when it involves criticism of him and his government. Truly sickening and despicable, but also not surprising since tyrants hate to have their failures and lies brought to light. Whether it's on public policy, their character, the economy, public safety, or any other issue, these psychopathic people despise criticism. Everybody dislikes criticism of themselves and their actions, but it serves a fundamental purpose, which is to guide and correct. You cannot improve without criticism. Constructive criticism, I should say. Since nobody is perfect, mistakes will be made, and this, therefore, necessitates improvement. The nature of narcissistic tyrants, though, is that while they might improve in some fashion, they can't stand criticism, even if it's for their benefit. And so, as we can witness with Trudeau in Canada, and others like Biden in the US, they attempt to stamp out justifiable criticism of their policies, which is truly disconcerting. The last remarks I'll make on this section pertains to how censorship is a fundamentally slippery slope that leads to disastrous consequences, without fail. One of those consequences is the manipulation of not only the present, but also of the past. On page 35 of 1984, Orwell brilliantly remarks, quote, "Who controls the past, controls the future. Who controls the present, controls the past." End quote. Indeed, an attempt to control the past evidently served the purpose of manipulating the present and future. Bill C-11 and other actions by the current government here in Canada are more thinly veiled attempts at narrative fabrication and arguably rewriting history to serve particular motives and political agendas. Time will tell how this plays out. However, we only need to analyze historical examples from the last century to witness how horrifying the results can be. To conclude, the free exchange of ideas and information is necessary for the pursuit of truth. Furthermore, there cannot be any improvement without truth. This is applicable not only to your personal life on a micro scale, but also society at large on a macro scale. The attacks on truth and the people who aspire to uphold it is truly disheartening, but not surprising. A timeless remark often attributed to Plato is that, quote, "There is no one who is more hated than he who speaks the truth." End quote. Even if Plato didn't make this remark directly, its wisdom is profound. Those who despise truth, how things actually are, rather than what they wish them to be, evidently love falsehoods and lies. This enables them to protect their beliefs and worldviews. It also grants them the flawed perception that they can escape the consequences of their failures and shortcomings. However, eventually the truth comes out and you cannot avoid facing the music forever. As it's written in the New International Version of Luke chapter 12, verses 2-3, quote, "There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What you have said in the dark will be heard in the daylight, and what you have whispered in the ear in the inner rooms will be proclaimed from the roofs." End quote. So, with the inherent problems of censorship outlined, it's clear that there are those who still attempt to utilize it for malicious purposes, despite its flaws. This indicates that wherever possible we must resist these efforts and push back against the tyranny that naturally flows from censorship. Nothing less than freedom of conscience, thought, and expression are at stake, in addition to fundamental truth itself. Continue to fight and resist these damned tyrants by speaking truth to power, but also remain hopeful because the truth will ultimately prevail, even in a world full of lies. I'll finish with this last quote from page 81 of 1984. "Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 makes 4. If that is granted, all else follows." End quote. Indeed, everything else does follow, as thought influences behavior and compels action. Before you can act, you must think and decide. So, think and exercise your God-given right and ability to free will. Every time you do, you're performing an act of resistance and refusing to submit to the bastards who are trying to take that ability away.